There were speaker fights, there was geopolitical conflict, Xi Jinping tried to take back the pandas, and oh yeah, a 2024 election cycle got underway. I'm Kevin Cirilli, host of The Hill TV's Daily Debrief, and coming up, we're taking a look back at some of the biggest stories to shape 2023 and what it all means for 2024. Republicans began the year with a newly elected House majority, but hardly the red wave that the GOP had predicted ahead of the midterms. Their first order of business, electing a speaker, typically a ceremonial procedure to project party unity and to set an agenda. Not this time. Congressman Kevin McCarthy, the Republican from California, was the clear frontrunner, but he quickly discovered that negotiating with his own party was just as much a challenge as dealing with Democrats.
When Kevin McCarthy finally clinched the gavel, it was in the middle of the night. I mean, I don't know how many folks were watching this play out on C-SPAN, but it was in the middle of the night, the very early hours. And so Kevin McCarthy finally clinched the gavel on the 15th ballot. But I want to talk about what happened on the 14th ballot, right? There was voting, and Kevin McCarthy came extremely close to clinching that gavel, and then the last person was up to vote, and that was Matt Gaetz. And Matt Gaetz cast his vote as present. And when he cast his vote as present, Republicans jumped up. They were jubilant. They believed that Kevin McCarthy had won the gavel just there, but the vote count was not that. They had counted incorrectly, and Kevin McCarthy actually came very close to winning the gavel, but he was not over the finish line just yet. 14th ballot, another loss for Kevin McCarthy. At that point, it looked like folks were going to go home, cool off the steam, and then return on Monday to try to elect a speaker. There was actually a vote to adjourn the House. And then at one point, everything clicked. Everything changed. You saw Matt Gaetz and Kevin McCarthy talking on the House floor. Then there were lawmakers saying, defeat this motion to adjourn. We're going to go one more round. Folks were screaming, one more round. 15th round for Speaker. Kevin McCarthy finally wins the gavel. After those 6 Republicans, including Matt Gaetz, vote present, it's enough to give Kevin McCarthy the gavel.
Enter Congressman Matt Gaetz, the outspoken Florida Republican with close ties to former President Donald Trump. With the help of the ultra-conservative Freedom Caucus, Gaetz was able to pressure McCarthy into promising to cut government funding as part of the upcoming looming debt ceiling battle later in the year.
This is swampy log rolling. The American people deserve single-subject bills. I get that a lot of folks might disagree with my perspectives on the border or on Ukraine, but can we at least agree that no matter how you feel about Ukraine or the southern border, they each deserve the dignity of their own consideration and should not be rolled together where they might pass where each individually wouldn't? This is what we're trying to get away from. This is the spirit of the January agreement we made with the Speaker. No more lashing these disparate issues together so that the American people's interests are subjugated here on the floor of the House.
One surprising McCarthy ally emerged, Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who would ignite a national conversation around political decorum when she heckled President Biden during his State of the Union address.
Once it was determined that it was indeed Marjorie Taylor Greene who yelled out liar, we had to figure out what exactly was she saying liar to. And just noting that this is a really memorable moment.
If Congress doesn't keep the programs the way they are, they'd go away. Other Republicans say, I'm not saying it's a majority of you. I don't even think it's even a significant, but it's being proposed by individuals. I'm not politely not naming them, but it's being proposed by some of you. Look, folks.
A lawmaker heckling the President of the United States during a State of the Union would on itself be notable, but a lawmaker calling the President of the United States a liar during the State of the Union, that kicks it up a notch.
At one point during McCarthy's speakership race, former President Donald Trump lobbied votes for McCarthy by calling Greene on the House floor so she could hand off her phone to members. The GOP divide was so strong that Republicans even wore special pins to show their backing. Only Kevin and never Kevin. Tensions became so fraught that at one point, cameras caught House Armed Services Committee Chairman Mike Rogers lunging at Gaetz on the House floor. Finally, after an unprecedented 15 rounds of voting, McCarthy claimed the gavel to become House Speaker in an historic middle-of-the-night vote.
That was easy, huh? I never thought we'd get up here.
McCarthy's path to speakership would prove to be a foreshadowing of his tenure over a raucous House Republican conference. There was George Santos, Republican from New York, who lied about his resume and would end up getting indicted for misusing campaign funds on everything from Botox to high-end fashion. Congress would ultimately kick him out of Congress, too.
If you are a unadulterated serial fraudster who has broken ethics laws, pled guilty to committing financial crimes in Brazil, and is facing a litany of accusations related to serious violations of federal law, then perhaps you should be held accountable in the House of Representatives.
But McCarthy's most contentious battle was over the debt ceiling, with some in his ranks openly ruminating that a default wouldn't be the cataclysmic economic disaster that economists have warned. By June, McCarthy was able to get a deal to raise the debt ceiling, but conservatives claim that McCarthy didn't keep his promise of raising the debt ceiling while cutting government spending.
Kevin McCarthy is out of options, right? He has no other way that he can please his right flank, but also avert a government shutdown. We are hours away from that funding deadline. Kevin McCarthy comes out and tells reporters, I am putting a clean continuing resolution on the floor. Fireworks broke out across Capitol Hill. Lawmakers and reporters are scrambling to avert a government shutdown. Members of the right flank steaming. Very mad, very angry. This was something that they had warned the Speaker against, something they told the Speaker that they did not want to see happen. Kevin McCarthy, hands tied, no more options on the table, wanted to avert a government shutdown, did the one thing the conservative House Republicans said not to do. He put a clean continuing resolution on the floor that ultimately passed with help from Democrats, something that conservative Republicans abhor, and that was the start of the end for Speaker Kevin McCarthy. That was the last straw for Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
You know, for the same reasons that, I opposed the CR on October 1st, because it continues to perpetuate the very system my constituents sent me here to oppose. They don't want me to continue spending money we don't have.
Days later, we see Matt Gaetz come back on Capitol Hill, and he announces, I am bringing a motion to vacate against Kevin McCarthy. Next day, vote on the House floor.
It would be the beginning of the end for McCarthy as Speaker of the House. By October, conservatives had successfully ousted their Speaker, making McCarthy's tenure the third shortest in U.S. history.
I fought for what I believe in, and I believe in this country of America. My goals have not changed. My ability to fight is just in a different form.
McCarthy was so taken aback that he reportedly elbowed Congressman Tim Burchett in the weeks that followed.
I turned, and dadgummit, there was McCarthy standing right there as he was walking. And I said, hey, Kevin, so what the heck are you doing?
Republicans' divisions were once again laid bare as House Freedom Caucus leader Jim Jordan battled Republican whip Steve Scalise for the job.
I told the conference it was an honor to be there, Speaker designee, but I thought it was important that we all know, give an answer to the question if they wanted me to continue in that role.
I just shared with my colleagues that I'm withdrawing my name as a candidate for the Speaker designee. If you look at over the last few weeks, if you look at where our conference is, there's still work to be done. Our conference still has to come together and is not there.
Neither would prove successful, and eventually a mild-mannered Louisiana Republican with little national name recognition would emerge as the Speaker. Mike Johnson secured the speakership, and Kevin McCarthy announced his retirement.
While I'll be departing the House at the end of this year, I will never, ever give up fighting for this country that I love so much.
Speaker Johnson's first test was to avoid a government shutdown.
This was a very important first step to get us to the next stage so that we can change how Washington works.
While he was able to broker the deal, it's unclear how long it would last. The deal only keeps part of the government funded through January and the rest through early February, setting up the potential for another government shutdown fight in early 2024. Hard or soft landing, and are we headed for a recession? Economists are still divided. That's next. Economists started the year worrying about a looming global recession. And even as CEOs pressed for employees to return to the office, companies like McDonald's, Amazon, and Goldman Sachs announced layoffs by the thousands. Burnout and fatigue plagued workers. In January, 7,000 New York City nurses walked out of the job, demanding better working conditions. This amidst a labor shortage. And Fed Chairman Jerome Powell grappled with bringing down the cost of inflation without tipping the economy into a recession.
He, in March, went to appear before the Senate Banking Committee, and he got really grilled by some lawmakers, particularly Senator Elizabeth Warren, who was pushing him on interest rates because of their potential impact on people's employment and how it could put people out of work.
If you continue raising interest rates as you plan, unemployment will be 4.6% by the end of the year. About 2 million people who would lose their jobs.
But I will say one of the surprises as the Fed has hiked interest rates to try to cool off this very hot post-COVID economy is that they have managed to keep very low unemployment. It was 3.9% in October, while also starting to steadily cut the number of job openings that are coming up each month. Economists were debating whether the economy was going to basically crash out into a recession, if it was going to there was going to be a lot more growing pains and have a hard landing before things are going to get better. But there was another option that back in January did not look feasible, which was a soft landing, which is that we were going to bring down some of those high prices without triggering a recession.
Heightened geopolitical tensions injected unknown risk and volatility into the economy. U.S. officials shot down a Chinese spy balloon.
They shot it!
That had flown over the U.S., prompting new economic restrictions against Chinese companies.
The presence of this surveillance balloon in U.S. airspace is a clear violation of U.S. sovereignty and international law.
Domestically, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen warned that the U.S. had hit the debt ceiling and was at risk of defaulting on its debt for the first time in U.S. history, setting up a massive fight on Capitol Hill.
House Republicans' approach to the debt ceiling is dangerous. Even brinksmanship over the debt ceiling can cause serious damage to the economy and to individual American families.
Hardline conservatives wanted then Speaker Kevin McCarthy to raise the debt ceiling in addition to cutting government funding, politicizing a process that for decades had remained nonpartisan.
On January 19th, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen lets then House Speaker Kevin McCarthy and Congress know that the U.S. has hit the debt ceiling and that they've taken extraordinary measures to pay down the nation's existing debts, but that they're setting up this big battle on Capitol Hill on whether to raise the debt ceiling limit or to basically put the nation in default, which would be catastrophic.
At the end of the day, Congress simply has to act to raise the debt ceiling.
Finally, at the end of May, President Biden was able to sign legislation to raise the debt ceiling as markets breathed a collective sigh of relief. This even as Republicans blame Bidenomics for the continued cost of high inflation and soaring gas prices.
As June gets closer, there's not a lot of movement. Biden and McCarthy do end up striking this last-minute deal to avert what could be a catastrophic default and the first ever default on the nation's debt.
Just spoke with Speaker McCarthy, and we've reached a bipartisan budget agreement that we're ready to move to the full Congress.
And even though they've managed to avoid that debt ceiling breakdown, there were still consequences for the brinkmanship that some of our political divisions have brought us.
By the summer, the economy found strength in pop culture icons. Barbie vs. Oppenheimer at the box office, and Beyonce and Taylor Swift's record-breaking tour sales. The Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, get this, they calculated that Swift's Eras Tour, it added $5 billion to the U.S. economy alone. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis found himself locked in a battle against Disney. DeSantis had threatened to take away the House of Mouse's ability to self-govern on its 25,000 acres in Florida.
We want to make sure that Disney lives under the same laws as everybody else.
Disney alleged that DeSantis was targeting them because of their objections to DeSantis' controversial so-called "Don't Say Gay" policies.
Say gay! Protect gay youth!
Tech CEOs continued to reshape the U.S. economy, perhaps none more than Elon Musk. Musk continued to find himself in the headlines as his SpaceX Starship had both successful and failed launches. Lawmakers put TikTok CEO Xiaozi in the political hot seat during a hearing about the China-based company. More than a dozen countries worldwide have banned or put restrictions against the company that's owned by Beijing-based ByteDance, citing national security concerns. Viral sympathy for 9/11 terrorist Osama bin Laden further added to the policymakers' scrutiny of the platform. Musk's power extended from social media to outer space, and also in Ukraine, where his Starlink internet server was revealed to be both a key asset and a hindrance to Ukraine's defense against Russia. And Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer vowed to work with both parties to create a framework for artificial intelligence, which Schumer said could revolutionize the economy at a rate not seen since the advent of the World Wide Web. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman was abruptly fired from his gig but reinstated just days later, further underscoring the turbulence in the AI field.
He's back in charge, and I think most people feel that's a good thing because he's such, we want to stay in the lead on AI. OpenAI has been leading the charge. There are other good companies, big and small, but I think there's a sigh of relief in the industry and probably in the country that Sam is back there.
The year was marked by organized labor fighting for better wages and working conditions. In November, Hollywood returned to work after the writers and SAG-AFTRA workers went on strike that lasted 4 months.
Union! Union!
And the year was marked by organized labor battling for better wages. SAG-AFTRA cited artificial intelligence as a key sticking point in their Hollywood strike, which would ultimately get resolved. UPS workers, Teamsters, and UAW also all negotiated for better wages and working conditions. The battles grew so contentious that Senator Bernie Sanders had to break up a fight that could have gotten physical between the Teamsters boss, Sean O'Brien, and Senator Mark Wayne Mullen, a Republican.
You want to say that you're trying to provide because you're forcing them to pay dues? And
no, we don't force them.
Senator, you've asked the
You're
question.
out of line.
Let him
man.
answer the
Actually, I
question.
haven't, and don't tell me I'm out
You
of line.
are out of line.
Coming up, Xi Jinping and President Biden meet in person. In 2023, congressional Republicans were frequently divided, but on one issue, they were consistent, boosting funds and calling for policy changes at the U.S.-Mexico border.
Joe Biden has been asleep at the wheel when it comes to the border. You need to wake up, Mr. President, before we get hit.
And polls suggest that voters across the ideological spectrum continue to be concerned about the border crisis. In January, President Biden headed to the border to meet with patrol officers. He did not meet with migrants. U.S.-China relations hit a new low when U.S. intelligence discovered a Chinese spy balloon flying over the continental United States.
When we first saw the spy balloon, it was really unclear how sinister it was versus whether this was a mistake. The Chinese came out really quickly to say, oh, it was a weather balloon that had blown off course. And as reporters, we had information that we knew Secretary of State Blinken had planned this trip, but it wasn't public knowledge yet. So we couldn't say whether his trip was in jeopardy, but at the same time, we're pressing the State Department. Is it a weather balloon? Is it something that is sinister? And pressing them, is he going to go on the trip? But we can't report that yet until finally they came out and they said that he would not be going to Beijing.
The Chinese spy balloon sparked national outrage and prompted President Biden to authorize the military to shoot it down. Economically, Biden also authorized for additional sanctions to be placed on Chinese companies involved with the CCP's supply chain, a supply chain that crafted the spy balloon.
On Wednesday, when I was briefed on the balloon, I ordered the Pentagon to shoot it down on Wednesday as soon as possible. They decided, without doing damage to anyone on on the ground.
Once the balloon was discovered and it was unclear when they first discovered it, how long it had been loitering over the U.S. before they discovered it, it really opened up this aperture of how many other unidentified flying objects were going over the U.S. and how many of those were threatening. And in quick succession, we saw the Biden administration shoot down another unidentified flying object, another unidentified flying object, and it was unclear what the main plan really was because they weren't able to collect some of the debris from the objects they shot down. And there were some reports that these were just hobby crafts.
Our friends are playing politics with U.S. intelligence. And the bottom line here is that shooting down the surveillance balloon over water wasn't just the safest option, but it was the one that maximized our intelligence payload.
They shot it!
The U.S. worked throughout the year to remove Chinese espionage centers from downtown cities to college campuses. In the Indo-Pacific, China continued to break with decades of standard operating international norms, routinely conducting military drills in the Taiwan Strait, raising alarming concerns that Chinese leader Xi Jinping was moving closer to invading the democratic island. Congressional lawmakers in both parties moved to increase funding for Taiwan's defense and to meet with Taiwan leaders. In April, less than 2 months after the U.S. shot down the spy balloon, now former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy hosted Taiwan President Tsai in California.
We take our support for the people of Taiwan seriously.
U.S. politicians remain deeply united in their skepticism of Xi's motives for failed efforts to broker some type of a peace agreement between Russia and Ukraine. And Xi's visit to the U.S. in November, his first visit to the U.S. in 6 years, did little to improve the tensions. For years, Washington has pressed Xi to address the opioid crisis, which has killed tens of thousands of Americans, asking Xi to stop Chinese companies from dumping fentanyl into the drug trafficking market. The White House sought to project progress on the fentanyl crisis, but even Biden pushed back against Xi's authoritarian regime to reporters after his meeting with Xi.
So today, with this new understanding, we're taking action to significantly reduce the flow of precursor chemicals and pill presses from China to the Western Hemisphere. It's going to save lives, and I appreciate President Xi's commitment on this issue.
And the same week that Xi traveled to the U.S., a horrific trend on China's TikTok platform went viral. Young people espousing empathy for 9/11 terrorist mastermind Osama bin Laden.
Towards the end of this year, this very weird phenomenon happened on TikTok where a letter that Osama bin Laden wrote after committing the September 11th terrorist attacks started to go viral with what looked like young influencers saying that they had read it and it changed their mind, and they were encouraging other people to read it. But as the reporting panned out, it seemed that there were a small group of influencers that didn't have much reach, and that the media, when they got a hold of this story and saw it, actually gave it a bigger life. But that, in turn, triggered TikTok to look into the algorithm and roll that back.
Lawmakers in both parties immediately renewed their calls against ByteDance, the Beijing-based tech company which owns TikTok, citing national security concerns.
We need to ban it nationwide. It's a great first step to ban it on all federal devices, including federal contractors. That's a lot of people, millions of devices around the country. But the truth is, it's a huge danger for our kids. It is a backdoor for communist China into the private lives of our children.
More than a dozen countries have already enacted bans or significant restrictions against the app. U.S. military and intelligence officials, as well as D.C. staffers, are not allowed to have the platform on their government phones. Then there was the whole thing with the pandas. Xi had ordered the 3 pandas in the National Zoo be given back to China.
We have an obligation, the United States and China, to responsibly manage the relationship.
In Europe, Ukraine continued to defend itself against Russia. The war had rallied NATO allies to come to Ukraine's defense, but Americans would grow fatigued on funding the effort.
On both sides, both on the economic and humanitarian front and on the military front, a big debate in Congress is whether Republicans in particular don't want to give as much economic support or humanitarian support to Ukraine. They feel that Europe should shoulder the burden. They want to give military support, but when you meet these refugees and when you meet the people that are helping them, they're so desperate for any help, and the need is so great that every bit matters.
Ukraine matters. What happens here matters, not just to Ukraine, but to the entire world.
Republicans grew louder in their calls for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to provide more transparency about where U.S. taxpayer money was going in the war effort.
I think, we need a little more accountability, a little more transparency from the administration and from the agencies involved so that we can convince our constituents that their taxpayer dollars are not being wasted or embezzled or there's not corruption involved.
The partisan divide would come to a head during Zelensky's December trip to Washington, where lawmakers remained deadlocked in a $101 billion supplemental aid package, a package that would boost support for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, as well as potentially funding of the U.S.-Mexico border. But the majority of that package was headed to Ukraine. Zelensky said the money was crucial for Ukraine's defense, but he would come up empty-handed, with Washington saying that they would resume the talks in early 2024.
In Ukraine, we are fighting for our country and freedom, and also in Europe, we say for our freedom and yours.
A total of $75.4 billion has already been sent so far to the Ukraine from the United States. And here's a breakdown. $2.7 billion in humanitarian aid, $26.4 billion in financial aid, and a combined $46.3 billion in total military aid. That includes security assistance, weapons and equipment, plus grants, loans for additional weapons.
So October 7th, October 8th, October 9th, it was unbelievable to try and wrap your head around what was happening.
Global conflict would further intensify on October 7th when the terror group Hamas attacked Israel during a music festival, killing 1,700 people and taking hundreds more hostage.
But then, of course, very quickly after October 7th, the conversation shifted to what was happening to Palestinian civilians in Gaza.
Israel launched a military operation against Hamas, global officials estimating the death toll at 18,000.
The vast majority of Palestinians are not Hamas. Hamas does not represent the Palestinian people.
The Israel-Hamas war reverberated through the United States, with hundreds of protesters in major cities. Hate crimes and hate speech against Jews and Muslims dramatically increased. The far left of the Democratic Party, including Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, vocally opposed Biden's support for Israel.
But Palestinian people are not disposable. We are human beings, just like anyone else. My city, my grandmother, like all Palestinians, just wants to live her life with freedom and human dignity we all deserve.
There's a recognition in Congress that Israel is an ally that needs to be supported, that Hamas is a terrorist organization, that what Congress has said, they believe, they agree with the Israelis that Hamas should be eliminated, but there is less of a recognition among lawmakers, among a majority of lawmakers, of the toll on Palestinian civilians in Gaza that has occurred based on Israel's military incursion into the Gaza Strip.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, the highest-ranking elected official who is Jewish, offered a moving speech on the Senate floor.
October 7th will go down as a day of inextinguishable grief. the deadliest single day for Jews since the Holocaust, a reminder of much older, darker days we must never return to.
It all came to a head during a House hearing on anti-Semitism on college campuses, where lawmakers grilled the presidents of MIT, Harvard, and the University of Pennsylvania. And this exchange would spark national outrage and bipartisan backlash.
Our policies are guided by the U.S. Constitution, so our longstanding open expression guidelines follow the Constitution. I think in addition to education, which I agree with, so that students and faculty and staff can identify and combat anti-Semitic tropes in speech, I think it's important to call out anti-Semitism in a very visible and public way and a specific way in order to make clear how it's contrary to the values of the institution.
UPenn President Liz McGill would be forced to resign as a result of the backlash. And Republican Congresswoman Elise Stefanik of New York, she announced an investigation with subpoena power into the universities.
This is a moral failure of Harvard's leadership and higher education leadership at the highest levels.
Despite at times criticizing Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, President Biden continued to back Israel, maintaining long-standing U.S. policy with its Democratic ally in the Middle East.
Well, I have had conversations with Bibi Netanyahu, and I want to make sure that we don't forget what we're doing here. We have to support Israel because they're an independent nation that's the brutality, the inhumanity, the way in which Hamas treated the Israelis, and raping and burning and beheading. Just beyond comparison, and to anything else that I've seen since I've been here, and I've been around for a long time. But I think that we have made it clear to the Israelis, and they're aware, that the safety of innocent Palestinians is still of great concern. And so the actions they're taking must be consistent with attempting to do everything possible to prevent innocent Palestinian civilians from being hurt, murdered, killed, lost, etc.
And just around the corner, former President Donald Trump did not let his indictment stop him on the campaign trail. There's one thing on everyone's mind going into 2024, and that's the presidential election. A lot of candidates put their hats in the ring this year and announced that they were running. But the biggest elephant in the room? Former President Donald Trump announcing his campaign plans despite losing to President Biden in 2020, as well as facing numerous indictments.
In order to make America great and glorious again, I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Trump continues to dominate the polls despite his mounting legal entanglements. Some experts say that the Republican primary is a race for second place among everybody else. In the middle of all that is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who positioned himself earlier in his career as a Trump ally.
You've been real supportive of Florida, so thank you.
We're very much involved with Lake Okeechobee. Okay, good job. Thanks.
DeSantis, who gained name recognition through the resistance of COVID-19 mandates, was largely seen as the future of the Republican Party post-Trump. But since announcing his campaign, he has become the subject of attacks from Trump, and his campaign has hit a few snags along the way.
Earlier this year, DeSantis was seen as an attractive candidate. There was that generational difference. He's in his mid-40s. He's younger than Donald Trump, has a young family, a rising star within the party, and someone who had quite a bit of influence in a state like Florida, which had been leaning red for some time, but he definitely solidified Florida turning red.
Are you glad to be in the free state of Florida? Do you wish the rest of the country was run like we run it here?
You saw a lot of conservatives, not only at the grassroots, but also at the establishment level here in Washington, who were looking at Florida as this centerpiece of the Republican Party and an example for other states. And DeSantis was very much seen as the leader of that. So I think there was a lot of hope that DeSantis could carry on that torch and signal a shift in the party going forward.
Problem with Ron DeSanctimonious is that he needs a personality transplant, and those are not yet available.
So Ron DeSanctimonious was, I think when we all heard that, we immediately got flashbacks to Lion Ted.
Breathe.
Crooked Hillary.
And I took it away from Hillary. Now we call her Beautiful Hillary. She's a beautiful woman. We call her Beautiful Hillary.
Little Marco, all of that stuff going all the way back to 2015 and 2016. It's Trump's signature move. He labels an opponent or someone he feels threatened by this nickname, and it has worked for him in the past. He's able to label them, and that sort of gets caught in our collective psyche. Now, this was notable because for the longest time before that, for years, Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis were sort of like two peas in a pod. In fact, DeSantis was seen as little Trump or Trump Jr. in a way when it came to Florida. If you go back to 2018 when he was running for election for governor, there's that very well-known ad.
Ron loves playing with the kids.
Build the wall.
He reads stories.
Then Mr. Trump said, "You're fired." I love that part.
He's teaching Madison to talk.
Make America great again.
People say Ron's all Trump, but he is so much more.
Big league. So good.
In a way, trying to shape the next generation of Republicans in the mold of Trump. So that partnership between Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump ended with Ron DeSanctimonious.
He didn't even fire Dr. Fauci. He didn't fire Christopher Wray. He didn't clean up the swamp. He said he was going to drain it. He did not drain it. He said he was going to build the wall and have Mexico pay for it. We don't have the wall. He did say in 2016 he'd have the largest deportation program in history. He deported less than Barack Obama did when Barack Obama was president. So some of these policies he ran on in 16, I was cheering him on then, but he didn't deliver it.
Look, the Republican primary electorate, although they like Ron DeSantis and they liked Ron DeSantis, they were still more comfortable with Donald Trump, and they thought Donald Trump was still the future of the party. In fact, if you look at the polls where Trump is leading, oftentimes these voters that are picking Trump will pick DeSantis as their second choice. So it's not like these primary voters ever disliked Ron DeSantis. It was just that they thought this was always Trump's race.
One of the biggest breakout contenders for the Republican nomination is American entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy. Once seen as an underdog, Ramaswamy has dominated headlines after the GOP debates. The entrepreneur has closely aligned himself with Trump, with the former president even declaring him the winner of the fourth GOP debate.
Talk about a roller coaster. Covering him in Milwaukee at the first debate, we thought this was going to be a DeSantis moment. Either DeSantis was going to have this breakout moment, or he was going to go head to head with someone and get attacked by other candidates. But it actually ended up being Vivek Ramaswamy being the biggest name to come out of that debate. He launched a number of bombastic attacks on various candidates on stage. That was the start of his feud with Nikki Haley, them going at it on stage. Vivek Ramaswamy very much trying to portray himself as Trump Jr. in a way, a younger version of Donald Trump who's willing to carry that populist flag going forward in attacking the Haley and the Chris Christies.
It is going to take a leader from the outside with fresh legs from the next generation to unite this country, not the broken politicians who are puppets of the puppet masters, but the actual people in this country.
This year, given the war between Ukraine and Russia and obviously the Israel-Hamas war, you saw an opening for him to do that. But the problem is he didn't offer a path forward. He just attacked the Nikki Haleys on stage and accused them of having George W. Bush or Dick Cheney foreign policy in an effort to appeal to that populist audience online. And that's what I think about Vivek Ramaswamy. He is very online. I don't think a lot of Iowa or New Hampshire primary voters watching these debates watches Vivek Ramaswamy and say, oh, now I'm going to consider him. I don't think he's really moving the needle with that crowd, but I think he does move the needle with people online.
The only person more fascist than the Biden regime now is Nikki Haley, who thinks the government should identify every one of those individuals with an ID. That is not freedom. That is fascism. And she should come nowhere near the levers of power, let alone the White House.
Nikki Haley has garnered attention recently by gaining some big-name endorsements. We're talking about the likes of New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu and the Koch network-backed super PAC Americans for Prosperity. And now experts are wondering if she can maintain and capitalize on this momentum.
I think Nikki Haley's campaign is sort of the story of the tortoise and the hare. Slow and steady wins the race. She launched her campaign in February. She was the second candidate to get in after Trump in November. And she had a lot of momentum after she launched her campaign. She had a very good week. It was a seamless rollout. You had a lot of folks in the political community praising her. Voters were interested. But after that, going into the spring and summer, things seemed to quiet down for Nikki Haley. You saw Ron DeSantis jump in. You saw Tim Scott jump in. But I think the first debate was her first major breakout moment. That was when she was able to show off her skills on the debate stage and go head to head with Ramaswamy. She's had a number of viral moments and memes of, the look on her face when he's criticizing her foreign policy. And she's had a number of clapbacks and one-liners against him that have been very popular with voters.
And she should come nowhere near the levers of power, let alone the White House.
And I love all the attention, fellas. Thank you for that.
So then I think after those debates, you started to see her rise in the polls. But you also saw a number of donors looking at her as the potential Trump alternative as Ron DeSantis was plateauing. So as she was rising in the polls, you started to see her get these endorsements like from Americans for Prosperity, the Koch network. An endorsement is one thing, but I think the resources that an endorsement brings is more important. She was able to launch a $10 million ad buy in Iowa and New Hampshire. She was not running ads as early as some of the other campaigns. So that, I think, played in her favor.
The race between Democrats and Republicans is on, but speculations remain if any more third-party candidates will enter the race. Independent RFK Jr. has been seen as a threat to both Biden and Trump, and moderate Democrat Senator Joe Manchin has announced he will not be seeking re-election for his seat. Now, the West Virginia senator is sparking a potential White House run as a third-party candidate or an alternative choice.
There has to be a movement from the middle. Do I have a burning desire to be president? No. Do I have a burning desire to save my nation and save our country and all of us? Absolutely. And I would do anything possible.
Looking at Joe Manchin, he's not a popular guy in Washington, particularly with Democrats, but also with Republicans. He always keeps Democrats on their toes with these votes, but usually ends up voting with his party. But he's much more conservative or moderate than the rest of his party. But whenever I go outside of Washington and talk to voters, sure, there's voters that don't like him, but I think he has more of a positive impact as someone who's standing up to the Washington establishment. That's my experience outside of Washington. So if I'm a group like No Labels or a group that's trying to recruit a third-party candidate, looking at someone like Joe Manchin, who is very much middle of the road in many ways, a Democrat from a very conservative state, he seems like a very ideal candidate. The problem is, though, you have Republicans and Democrats looking at these third-party candidates, and we have to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., too, and they say all of these guys are going to be spoilers. And it's, I think we normally talk about third-party candidates and how they impact Democrats. And I think Joe Manchin has the ability or could potentially take votes away from Biden. But Robert F. Kennedy, he could take votes away from Trump. It's amazing to see how big his umbrella of support has grown. You can go to a Robert F. Kennedy rally and talk to someone who voted for Clinton in 2016 or someone who voted for Trump in 2016. He has this plethora of support. About the moment, it says that voters are so uncomfortable and fatigued with the two choices they're being presented, Trump versus Biden. With someone like Kennedy, I think, has done a good job of speaking to the collective moment we live in, whether it comes to the two-party system, COVID restrictions. He's tapping into a frustration that voters from both sides of the aisle and the middle feel about the political process and Washington itself. It also helps, or it doesn't hurt him that his last name is Kennedy. So he's able to poll higher maybe than a Marianne Williamson.
Things could not be more up in the air with the 2024 presidential election as we ring in the new year. Former President Trump faces multiple indictments, and questions still circulate about President Biden's fitness to run for office given his age. A dysfunctional Republican caucus continues to hold up legislation in Congress, potentially impacting the party's electability. And then, rising unrest in the Middle East has also put new pressure on the Democratic Party as it has shown its divide between the far left and more moderate Democrats. One thing is for sure, the 2024 election will be a wild ride. That does it for this year's 2023 recap, and on behalf of everybody here at The Hill, we're wishing you and your families and loved ones a safe, happy, and healthy holiday season and a happy new year. And be sure to stick with The Hill all throughout 2024. It is sure to be an unpredictable one, to say the least.